First of all, I want to say thank you for bearing with me yesterday. Yesterday, I had very little sleep, so I apologize about any communication error there might have been in my presentation yesterday. So what I would like to start out with today is just explaining exactly what I'm trying to convey. And as I have on the board, I have the title is The Woman Behind the Kings. So I'm trying to show a layer that that isn't really talked about a lot, and it's how the papacy is affecting the kings of the earth. And I believe, though the spirit of prophecy, it says things like this. It talks about how prophecy foretells a restoration of the papacy's power. We know that the Sunday law movement is making its way in darkness. We know that she is strengthening her forces, things like this. But I think that the Lord has given us light on how the papacy is actually moving in darkness. Because as we learned today, if we watch for it, we will not be children of the night, we will be children of the day. And out of all the movements on the earth, I think God would give us light on what the enemy of souls, his chief weapon, what she is doing. Right, so that's what I'm desiring to show. Is to deal a little bit of how the papacy has affected the king of the north and the king of the south, and even with choosing who the leaders of these nations will be, and vice versa. There's this give and take relationship in that. So that's kind of where we're headed. And yesterday we went over a lot of history. I'll recap briefly, and then we'll get into some of the ideas I have, and I'm definitely open for correction on these things. So what we talked about yesterday was also the term fascism. Right? I kept saying fascism yesterday, and I think it was just my tongue was tired along with my brain, and I wasn't saying fascism. So I know it's fascism, not fascism, right? I don't know why I was saying that yesterday. But what we had marked was laying out these popes, and we talked about how Pope Pius the 11th, we know that the end of his life and the beginning of Pope Pius the 12th, his reign as Pope. We know that this brings us to the time of the end on this false line. But Pope Pius the 11th, we learned how the papacy was looking for a beast to ride. And this beast at one time was had this Marxist mindset. It was trying to ride Hitler in Germany, and that was the beast that she wanted to ride to conquer the kings of the earth. But Pius, he saw that this power of Germany, it was going too far. He wanted to repent, and we learned that he was going to make this proclamation, right? And he was going to make this proclamation on February 12th of 1939, and then he ended up dying, right? And certain sources say that he was killed 2 days before then. And we also saw how that linked us back to February 12th, 1774, maybe? It's in the record from yesterday. But how on this same date there was another pope killed, and he was someone who was dealing with the powers that be at that time, and once he bucked against the system, they had him killed. And it was the same thing here with Pope Pius the 11th. And then we see Pope Pius the 12th come on the scene. And Pope Pius the 12th, we learned that it's stated that he held Pope Pius the 11th in a straitjacket, as far as being even shutting his ear to hearing anything in the Vatican that was pro-communist of any sort. And Pope Pius, he was a true blue guy, in that he even excommunicated members of the Catholic Church who even voted for anyone that was communist. So he was serious. He wanted to ride this beast known as the United States, and he made this alliance with the United States. And we learned about this triumvirate of Pope Pius, Archbishop Spellman, and the Dulles brothers. And the two Dulles brothers, one was the head of the CIA, other the head of the Secretary of Secretary of State, and in those, so this triumvirate, they were connected to the United States, and they had this, as they called a hotline between the Vatican and the United States to do their dirty work of conquering the world. And this is all predicated here. We see these two powers come to be in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution, right? There was this, had this proletariat mindset, and it's this line down here, this revolutionary mind, this radical mind, and they did not believe in a God, right? And this was, and that's a thread that takes us back to the French Revolution, that shows that this Soviet mindset is the king of the South, right? And being atheists here. And Pope Pius, on the other hand, he, connected to 1917, he believed in the vision of Our Lady of Fatima, right? And this, a part of this message at this time was that Russia must be destroyed, right? And Russia, being the enemy now of the Catholic Church, according to Mary, Russia must be taken down. And this is what Pius XII's goal is in life. And he's true to this. He believes this, right? But we also learned there was another player in Stalin who wanted, he entered upon information gathering. And his information gathering, he pulled, in the Soviet Union as a whole, pulled down every thread of information about every single person that they possibly could. And he used this information to try and determine who the next pope would be. Because if you're in control of the papacy, if you have someone that believes like you believe, then you now have the power over hundreds of millions of people. And you can influence nations because they have this powerful voting hand. This, depending on which country you're in, then you just have a bunch of revolutionaries. As we see in countries like South America, and these wars that were going on in these times, we know that even these popes, they went into Africa and Latin America, and they had a fresh body of people who already had this revolutionary mindset. But then you make a more Latin bishops or African bishops, and they believe like you believe, and then you can influence, the masses. So Pope Pius is linked here, and I marked Russia failed because Stalin, he wanted to get a pope who believed like he believed into office. So Pope Pius XII, he dies here in 1958. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. He died here in 1958, and this is when Pope John the 23rd comes on the scene. And Pope John the 23rd, he selected because the Vatican is now split, right? And it's split because Pope Pius, though he was true blue, not everybody else in the Vatican was true blue. And this is just a reality of the papacy. It's still people, everyday people like us, but this is Satan's, this is his favorite, but he still has to use people. He has to deal with their personalities and things like that. And so because of Pope Pius's personality, it caused the Vatican to have a split. And in that split, you had people who were, and during this time, who were shut down and couldn't speak. As soon as he dies, they now come to the forefront. And they are very active at this point. And Pope John the 23rd, he brings this radical change to the Vatican, in that whereas the previous popes, they were like this king, this person that was untouchable, this pope here, he's of a peasant background. He has peasant hands. He likes porridge. He likes the simple things in life that more common people, more normal people are accustomed to. And this is what, who he is, the Soviets saw that there was this common thread there. He saw it as well, because this is how he grew up. And he did not believe in Fatima. And his mindset about Fatima was basically, it's a bunch of nonsense, so to speak. And this is the mindset of these popes, even though this pope didn't live long enough to really say what he believed. But there's another element here to show how this split during the Vatican is existing even in Pope Pius the 12th day, because Pope Paul VI, though he is a progressive, and he's even more progressive than this guy, he was Pius the 12th Secretary of State within the Vatican. So you see how Pius the 12th, he was true blue, but there are other factors in play. And something I want to say about Pope Paul VI. So he was even more radical than him. Oh yeah, and we learned that eventually, this was 1953, I believe, that Pope Pius XII offered him the cardinal's hat. He rejected it, right? And this endeared him to the revolutionary, the radicals within the Vatican. And Pope Pius sent him off to Milan, I believe it was. And this was like a big time demotion. You're still involved, you still have a high position, but you go from being the Secretary of State to now you're basically a janitor, but you're still in the Vatican, so to speak. So he was demoted, but he also couldn't be made Pope at this time because he had refused the cardinal's hat. And the only way you could become a Pope is if you're of that body of cardinals. So Pope Paul VI, he is given the cardinal's hat right here by this guy, Pope John the 23rd. And Pope John the 23rd, he does this because this guy's even more serious than him. And he also wants to keep it going, where he wants to keep the same system, the same ideology going, because both of them are anti-Fatima, radical, proletariat, progressive, a common stock type of person. And here, when Pope Paul, when he died, Pope John Paul I, he was put into office, and he knew that there was something awry, because I wish I had the reference handy. I don't want to spend any time searching. But he basically said that when he was selected, he basically said, did I just make the right move? Because history tells me I might not make it long. So you can find out what he said, and I could look for it later and share it with you. But during this time, it's marked how the United States, they failed here in getting their man into office. So the Soviets, they have their man here. And during this time also, you see the Soviets, they kept winning wars. And America's having to back out of multiple wars. They enter into this war, and they kind of lose. They enter into that war, and they kind of lose. And I have a list of them. I'll try to grab it real quick, just a reference to some of these. Just to go over really quick. Yeah, so the United States, they retreated after the Korean War. They retreated after the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. They retreated before the Soviet-Cuban blackmail in the 60s. And I wrote that note down, but I can't even remember why I wrote it. And they retreated after Vietnam in the 70s. So, granted, I was a child, I was born in 1980, so I don't know much about this history as far as living it goes. But from what I've read in history and what people tell me who were actually alive in this time, the Soviet Union was very powerful, and this is the Cold War that's going on. And people are living on edge, especially when America drops nuclear bombs on people. Right? So that kind of keeps some nations in check. But the Soviet Union, they are powerful, and it's looking like that the Soviet Union could definitely dominate the world. And this is a mindset that these popes have, and they're very confident. right? Because Soviet Union and United States, they're neck and neck. So United States failed here at getting their man selected, but what they did here, according to some of the conspiracy theories, ideas out there, but we do know that popes can be taken out, right, and popes can be put in place, right? So it's not far-fetched, but at least this one guy, Avro Manhattan, he says that Pope John Paul I was killed, and then United States, they get their man with Pope John Paul. One thing about Avro Manhattan, and me and Sister Alyssa talked about it yesterday. I'm not saying this guy's a Christian as far as this book goes. And even when you read this book, he's off on some of his, because he has this, you have your license to say whatever you want to say, but he kind of has his prophetic ideas that he think is going to happen. And some of the things are off. And also, within this book, there are a lot of, editing mistakes. But I'm saying all that to say this isn't the only resource that I use. I tried to check as much information as I could about the facts that he was saying. He was pretty much on par. For instance, one part of the book, he says that the 33-year reign of the Catholic democracy, at one point in the book, he says it ends in 1976. Another part of the book, he says it ends in 1977. So I don't know how the editing and, confirmation of information worked in the late 20th century, but there are some flaws there. So I'm not, not making this guy the gospel teacher or anything like that, but it's still information there. So, and he helped lay out at least this idea. So back to this. So with the United States failing here, then they get their man in Pope John Paul. And we know they got their man here because it's widely known that Ronald Reagan, he was an actor prior to his becoming president. And the same thing is known about Pope John Paul II. They both were actors. And Reagan, Pope John Paul II is already ruling, but Reagan dominated this presidency mainly because of the Catholic vote here in America. So Reagan and Pope John Paul, I don't know what both of them being actors means here, but one thing about Pope John Paul that's unique is that he was from Poland, but he really did not like Russia at all. He hated Russia. He was from Catholic Poland, and he hated Russia. But he was also still a man that was more of the peasant stock, right? So he wasn't of the kingly mindset that Pope Pius XII had, but he was of a different mold than the other conservative popes, at least from this point right here. So that's a unique thing about Pope John Paul II. And so, but we know he was conservative, and we know time of the end, the king of the north and the king of the south, they're battling. So we know he's, according to this line right here, we know we can mark Pope John Paul conservative because he's on the side of the king of the north. Right? Well, he is the king of the north, and the United States, the armies of the king of the north. But in other lines, the United States is clearly the king of the north also. So 1989, we have Pope John Paul II here. And this is where the Midnight Cry message helped me understand this dynamic right here. So Pope Benedict, we know he was conservative, and we know the St. Gallen group, from what Sister Tess brought out, and also did some research as well. These guys were radicals. Now they use the term radical in looking up, and I'm assuming, based on the weight of what history is telling us what a radical is, and also the Midnight Cry message, so I'm taking what prophecy is telling us and history. These groups are radicals, and so they're going to be of this stock right here, and they get their man in Pope Francis, and they failed here in getting their man with Pope Benedict. So they get their man here, and they're radicals, right? So this is the part that's interesting to me, and I want to share a couple ideas and then go to one other thing. And I have a ton of time left, so definitely going to finish early. So we already established the papacy is moving in darkness. Sister White talks about that. But I believe we can see that because we are children of the light. What I'm seeing is that somehow between these battles of the king of the north and the king of the south, we should also see the woman behind them. And we know that Jezebel, she's behind the scenes, pulling strings. We know that Herodias, right, she's behind the scenes, pulling strings, and she gets, you know, she's the one who wants John the Baptist's head cut off, but it's Herod that does it. What's another example? The woman, as Brother Jeff talked about this morning, I saw a presentation by Elder Parmender from, it had to be at least 7 to 8 years ago. And I'm saying that because he mentioned his son's name and he was talking to his son like a child. So it wasn't something recent because his child now is grown. So he spoke to him like a child in the video because he was making some noise. And so anyway, this was it had to be at least 7 years ago. And I'm just saying that as a reference point to Revelation 17 and the woman riding the beasts, and the beasts are the kings of the earth, and the woman is the papacy. So we see that the woman, she's behind the scenes, but it's the beast is what you see. And so in these beasts, which are the king of the north and the king of the south, we know that throughout history, and even since this time of the end, the woman, which is this church right here, she's riding the beast, whether it's the king of the north beast or the king of the south beast. King of the north beast, right? Right here, between these two popes. But Francis, if he's of this stock right here, then that must mean, if this history is accurate as I'm portraying it, then that must mean Francis, he's riding the king of the south, right? Because he's of this stock. He isn't this stock. Now, I don't know what that means necessarily, but from what I'm saying, history, and from everything we can see in modern day times, Francis, he is a liberal, right? Not even close to being a conservative. So that's an interesting fact. And I say it's an interesting fact because we know from what we're understanding, Francis is the Pope that's going to bring in the Sunday law. And the Sunday law I'm marking blue here because the Sunday law is going to come from the conservatives, from the Republican end of the spectrum, right? And the Republicans would be here, right? And these Republicans who have a totalitarian mindset, they have this Fatima mindset. And we know this is true on multiple witnesses because the papacy conquers in threes, right? And one of those threes is the king of the south, right? So, and the king of the south has to be conquered, which is Russia, right? So we know Russia isn't going to conquer Russia, right? So there's something there with this last pope, and I think it's an answer. I don't know how to pull it out yet, but Francis, he's a liberal, and you can even trace that to where he's born, which is Argentina, right? And so we know that is South America as a whole is of the proletariat, revolutionary mindset, and not of the conservative mindset, which is where the Sunday law would come from. So this is where it gets interesting. So we have November 9th. I got a lot of stuff in my head. November 9th, 2013, that's when Trump visited Russia, right? What's interesting about this 2013 is Francis, he was selected Pope. And I'm saying selected, elected, because you think we got stuff going on between right and left here in America. Imagine how it goes down in the Vatican, which is the hotbed, but we just don't see it. But they are playing, they are on a global basis for real, who the Pope is. The United States is also. But Francis, he was selected Pope in 2013. So I think that's interesting as we look at collusion. And so what I'm thinking is somehow, and I can't put my hand on it, but somehow this woman is behind the scenes pulling these strings because the rest of history tells us how the United States and the King of the South, they're trying to get their woman And the woman is just as much trying to keep the right person on the throne of the kings of the earth so she can, she wants to be in control. So that's an interesting fact. So a partial answer to this, and Sister Alyssa, she reminded me yesterday that Elder Marco, he did some presentations, and he did them at Lambert. I was there. I just can't remember what he said. But she talked about, reminding me how he was showing how Cleopatra was the papacy and how she's switching sides or whatever. And I can't verify that. That just was she communicated to me yesterday. So there's that element. But what I noticed is that there are two women in the book of Daniel that's on one side, and then she's on the other side. And they do the opposite thing. So one is, I probably don't need to write it down, but I'll write it down. But it's very simple. But it's two women. It's Cleopatra. And Octavia. And Cleopatra, she's on the side of Caesar. And then she goes over to Antony. Right, so this would be I just put King of the North for reference, and King of the South. But then Octavia, if you remember, she went down and she married who? She had married Antony, right? And then when Antony runs off and is defeated, she comes back to the King of the North side. And her brother is Octavius, or just put Octavius. But I'm just noticing how you have two women in this history who switch and they go to the other side, right? And Cleopatra does it, and Octavia does it. And if I believe this happens at the same time, because Antony is defeated, that's when Octavia comes back, and she basically dismisses everything, and she says, I was basically down there, paraphrase, just for political reasons, right? And Cleopatra, she's first with Caesar, and she's with Antony. So at the same time, and this is what I'm not totally sure, but I think it's accurate, at the same time, these two women switch sides or roles, whatever. And I'm wondering if that's what Francis is going to be forced to do. And I'm saying that because we know in this information warfare, it's still a battle, but it's just information, right? Francis, not only is he ruling since 2013, but the next waymark that we have is what? And who wins that battle? It's the King of the South is going to win. So it's interesting that here, Francis, he would be of this stock right here. And granted, these are just general terms. I'm not trying to pretend that there are no other dynamics, just like with Pope John Paul II. But Francis, we know we can label him as a conservative because one of the fundamental parts of, or one of the earliest parts of this Midnight Cry message was that Francis won, and St. Gallen Group got their man, and Benedict wasn't their man, and he was a conservative of the same stock as John Paul II. As a matter of fact, Sister Tess brought out that basically he was just John Paul II reincarnated, basically. But I think it's interesting that the next waymark we see is Raphael, and the King of the South wins. And then at that next battle, the King of the North wins, and if Francis is the last pope, that's what I'm thinking. Francis, he has to change over to some degree in where he stands. And it wouldn't be foreign because this is how I'm marking Pope Pius XII, who would first, he got on the side of Hitler, right? and then he changed later his mindset, right? And this is connected to the time of the end because Pius, these two Piuses who have the same name, so I think that's interesting as well. Though it's not uncommon by any means, but both of them can be seen here as well. And so he changes over. So I think that's interesting. So I'm thinking somehow this, even maybe on a collusion level, maybe there's something there to, which I believe we should be able to see. There's something there with the woman being tied to this collusion, because in all these other histories, I think it would just be even a denial of, if history is showing this, then I think we can, we can stamp it as definitely there with Francis. So that is that, and I am studying to try to figure out how this plays out in other areas, but I just haven't reached any other concrete, definite things yet for me to be able to share. So, and there's one other thing. If we could turn to Daniel chapter 11, I think this is very cool in regards to this this right wing, left wing, which media source we can listen to, which media source which media source would be the one that is going to give people the necessary information to be able to see what the enemy of souls is trying to do. And we know this will be coming from the left, the radical stage, who are going to war against Trump, who's the last president, who's going to bring in the Sunday law. So that's, as we go into these verses, this is what I want us to see. So Daniel 11, verse 14. And I'm just going to reference Uriah Smith's Daniel in Revelation. And he has some commentary in verse 16 that I think is really, for me, when I saw it and I shared it with Brother Tyler, my mind, I lost a lot of sleep that night, but sometimes you find a gem, and I still hope it's a gem. And then it's like, man, you can't do nothing. You just got to share it with somebody. So this is one of those things. But it says, verse 14, Daniel 11, it says, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and shall cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So we know this is talking about the king of the north. At this time would have been Antiochus, I believe. But verse 14, what I really want us to see is verse 14, how you have the robbers of thy people, and you also have the king of the north. Because the king of the north is ruling, then we know Rome is going to come in. They're the robbers of thy people, right? So I want us to look at those two things. So I want us to focus on the robbers of thy people, because in order for Rome to be fully on the throne, they have to conquer three, right? And then now you're the king of the north after you conquer these three. So when we get down to verse 16, and it says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his will, right? And this is Rome, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land. So we have the glorious land coming into play, and this is talking about when Pompey, he comes and try to settle this dispute. And if you remember verses 16 through 22, these are the verses that we looked at that showed us who the last four presidents, right? And these take us all the way to the Sunday law. But Uriah Smith, he gives some really good commentary on these verses. And Matter of fact, it's Daniel in Revelation 2:33.5 is where it starts. But he says this, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. Okay, that was reading the verse. It says, although Egypt could not stand before Antiochus, the king of the north, Antiochus could not stand before the Romans, who now came against him. No kingdoms were longer able to resist the rising power. Syria was conquered and added to the Roman Empire when Pompey, BC 65, deprived Antiochus Asiaticus of his possessions and reduced Syria to Roman province. Then he says, the same power was also to stand in the Holy Land and consume it. Rome became connected with the people of God, the Jews, by alliance, BC 161, from which date it holds a prominent place in the prophetic calendar. It did not, however, acquire jurisdiction over Judea by actual conquest till BC 63, and then in the following manner. So he's going to lay out this story for us, and I won't read the whole thing, but we know it. Pompey, he's coming to Jerusalem, and he's going to settle this dispute between Aristobulus, so these two guys, Aristobulus, and other guys, Hyrcanus, I'm not sure how you say his name. All right, so he's going to come and he's going to settle this dispute, right? And what happens next is Aristobulus, he says, well, you know what? I think Pompey is going to not give me the kingdom. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to war against him, right? And so Pompey comes as he's getting closer. How do you say this guy's name? Aristobulus, he comes out to meet Pompey. He has this change of heart and he says, you know what? Basically, I'm giving into your hands, right? And so Pompey, he holds Aristobulus captive, right? And Aristobulus had promised Pompey some money. So Pompey sends his people over there to collect the money at the gate. And the people, this is very cool right here. The people that were of this stock, they stand on the walls and they say, we're going to battle you. You're not taking over the city. And they battle. They get inside the city. Pompey gets inside the city and they're fighting them, right? But what does Hyrcanus do? Hyrcanus throws his hands up and basically lets them right in, right? So what's so cool is I'm going to say Aristobulus, he is the Democrats. And Hyrcanus, he's the Republicans. Or also represented as the two news sources. So I just do CNN and Fox for now, but we know these are just terms, very general terms. So one stands on the walls and they're fighting, right, against the king of the north, which is Pompey at this time. Hyrcanus lets him in, right? But what made this thing so cool, and I was like, Lord, this is amazing, is when you look at their names, what their names mean. And it's one of these names was a given name because they couldn't actually find the original source. And I can't remember which one it was. But I'll start with Hyrcanus. You know what his name means? Wolfland, right? So Hyrcanus, his name means, I'll write it in red. I meant to do that in blue. But Hyrcanus, his name means, I'll keep it in black. Doesn't matter. But Hyrcanus, his name means wolfland. Now let's turn to John 10:12. And let's see what we know about the wolf. You probably already know it, but I think it's very cool. John 10:12. We start with verse 11. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. And the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. So this wolf is going to be somebody that's going to scatter the sheep, right? So this wolf, we also know that Satan, he comes as a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So this wolf is going to represent the messages from Satan, which would be accurate to those who are going to bring in the Sunday law, but land, right? Wouldn't that be a message from the glorious land, right? So this is a message within America that's the wolf land. This is a deceptive message in the glorious land right here. So wolf land, that's what Harkannen's names mean. But what really blew my mind was this guy's name, because I thought that was interesting. But you know what Aristobulus' names mean? It means best advisor, right? So I'll just write it here, best advisor. So this guy, who would be this media stream right here, they're going to give the American people the best advice, and they're going to be standing on the walls saying, "You not conquering this country," right? So this, and that's right in Daniel 11, verse 16. That's the Writer Smith commentary about the names. But I think this was a definite another line of the many lines that's showing how this is the media stream here that is going to give people the best advice. Those people who may not know anything about this message, they could get an accurate message about how to fight against this invasion of the Constitution, which is going to awaken people's minds. So they get the best advice from the Democrats. This news source, rather. So that was it. Shall we pray? Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for this time once again to be here at the end of the world and to be the very people that you are, Lord, revealing secrets, Lord, that have revealing things that have been kept secret, Lord, from the foundations of the earth. Lord, we thank you for these opportunities to learn these truths. And Lord, I pray that you will open up to us, Lord, and give us the clarity as a movement, Lord, especially on this latest truth of collusion and what it means and what we should be looking forward to, and also November 9th as well. And Lord, we know that you will reveal these things, Lord, as we put ourselves in position to receive those things, Lord. So we must continue to eat the little book. And Lord, we just pray for the latter rain even now at this camp meeting, Lord. So bless us as we continue on our day today and throughout the rest of the week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.